Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be covering the weekly metagame breakdown for the Explore best of 3 format. We did best of 1 a little bit ago, but there hasn't been anything too significant in terms of sets that have been recently released. Aether Drift has been kind of a dud across multiple formats, not having too much impact. We had a Nerd Rage Gaming 5K this past weekend. The finals was, surprise, surprise, Rakdos Demons versus Rakdos Demons in a battle of Fable the Mirror Maker decks. Rakdos Demons won, spoiler alert. But we are going to look at what's happening on the ladder up to Mythic rank, seeing what's winning for folks. We're getting the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen. A companion tool tracks your win rates, other users, gives a whole bunch of cool stats. If you want to use Untapped, link is in the video description. I will timestamp and paste all these deck lists as well in the video. So looking at popularity of the day, Rakdos Demons makes up about a quarter of your matches. We have Gruul Aggro at 13.5. So this is going to be both Bushwhack as well as pretty much standard Gruul has been ported over. The deck is very strong in that regard. Very similar, there's a mono red list that was floating around at one of the challenges on MTGO that was basically mono red standard with like 4 links main, just 2 Bone Crushers, 4 Kumanos. The list was pretty stock, a couple Mutavaults otherwise. It was basically the standard deck. So if you are looking to branch out of the format, there's ways to do so. We have Azorius Control at 6%, Izzet Phoenix at 3.2, Ninjas at 3, Sacrifice at 3. Phoenix and Sacrifice aren't doing too well. We won't be covering them. They were sub 55% based on, we could see even here, like 45% for Phoenix in terms of the matchup spread. We see like the Demons deck just continue to be one of the most played, but a big jump this week from the Gruul deck. So we are going to dive into Mythic rank. We have 5,000 games played for the last week. Rakdos Demons is the highest win rate deck. There's a lot of configurable pieces in these shells. So the core of the deck is Unholy Annex, which is going to give you card advantage and be the demon. You have Fable the Mirror Breaker, you have Blood Tithe Harvester, your Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, just a bunch of interaction. Your removal options can kind of vary. This version here is doing a split of 2 Fear of Missing Out and 2 Unstoppable Slashers. Slasher seems pretty good in the mirror. The only thing that really deals with it is a Torch the Tower, or you have to use multiple removal options on it. Archfiend of Dross is typically not seen in a lot of lists. They play the 2-mana equipment version. I forget the name of it right now, the 3/1 demon that lets you curve in. But this does close out the game a little faster. It does expose you a bit if your opponent's on Heartless Act, but it is a powerful way to just kind of turn the clock. You'll see Mutavault in the mana base. This allows you to tap the Mutavault, animate itself, counts as a demon for the Unholy Annex. You also have Urborg that fixes your mana in this deck. Invoke Despair for kind of these mid-range mirrors, goes over the top, good against control. Against Sacrifice, low to the ground aggressive decks, you have Hidetsuku. Go Blank is Hand Hate and Graveyard Hate. Anger the Gods for creature decks. Unlicensed Hearse for graveyard decks. Meathook Massacre as a sweeper. It gains you some life. And then Duress as Hand Hate. We then go to Mono Green Devotion at 74%. So this deck here got Oath of Nissa. So it's not doing the Karn shenanigans anymore. You're not doing Nicol Bolas Chain Veil kind of shenanigans. But this just helps dig you deeper, helps you find creatures or lands, in particular Nykthos, and it counts for devotion. Nykthos is the land of choice in this deck, allowing you to generate huge amounts of mana. Using Kiora Behemoth of Beckoner lets you tap and tap it. You have Outcaster Trailblazer and Kiora that both draw you cards when big things come into play. Core of the deck is generate a whole bunch of mana, chain together a whole bunch of creatures, filter that mana through Uvenwald Oddity, transform it, give all your team trample haste, overrun your opponent that way there. Your sideboard, you got Cityscape Leveler, catch-all kind of removal option on the top end, Mikestone, Meekstone. This deck can struggle against things like Shieldred. You're drawing a lot of cards, so it's a way to kind of deal with it that way. You have Wicked Wolf in here. We haven't seen this since the Oko meta, but this is basically for those red-based aggro decks. Anything low to the ground, 4 mana, 3/3, can come down basically turn 3 most of the time. And this will allow you to just fight your opponent's creatures. Frillback, Artifact Enchantment, Graveyard Hate, and Life Gain. Stonebrain for combo stuff, Monstrous Emergence. Another way to have a fight spell with using a creature from your hand as opposed to the battlefield. A lot of times you kind of expose yourself with the fight spells because they can interact with your creature in response, or with this deck here, it would require you to have it. This allows you to have a turn 2 fight spell without actually committing to the board at that point. And then Pithing Needle for activated abilities. Mardu Greasefang, 71%. So this is a deck I have in paper. So we have the Mardu version gives you access to Fable, Fear of Missing Out, Kroxa. The lists are playing some numbers of Overlord of the Balemark in here to allow you to self-mill. New card that's being played is Fowler's Flagship. So flying first strike lifelink. It gives you a 7/7 body. So kind of taking one of the slots of Sky Sovereign here. You still have Parhelion as a 4 in the deck. This is also self-enabling into the graveyard where you can cycle it, get vehicles, or crew members, mounts if you would, and kind of go from there. We see Vanishing Verse in the slot as well as some Bitter Triumph that also helps you discard. Core of the deck, get card into graveyard, cast Greasefang, animate, and smash face. So this deck here, none of the new land. I was just seeing if the Black-White Verge was being played. At its core, it's still a red-black deck, kind of going from there. You have Vanishing Verse, very good against the red decks, any kind of mono-ish color stuff, Graveyard Hate and Unlicensers, Bankbuster for the grindier matchups, Containment Priest, anything that's cheating into play, creativity style decks, basically anything that you're trying to sneak into play creatures. Torch Tower as just cheap exile removal, Portable Holds, good against a lot of the graveyard hate in the format, Duress is hand hate, and then Deafening Silence for Phoenix, anything kind of storming off. Like with this deck here, you could usually pivot post board if you want and get out of the combo and just play like a Mardu mid-range-ish deck and beat them that way there. So Rakdos Aggro, 68%, your standard deck that's been upgraded. So kind of the fling package, another deck I own in paper. So this one here is you're just using a bunch of pump effects, Heartfire Hero, Swift Spear, you have your mouse package, Dreadhorde Arcanist lets you flashback stuff, Nemesis in here plays really nice with stuff like Reckless Rage, targeting it deals the damage to your opponent so you can kind of redirect damage, shut off the life gain. Most of your stuff scales out of the 2 damage anyways, so it keeps them alive. You have Dreadhorde, like I said, Calisel Sword flings your stuff at your opponent, and then you have Fatal Push. Infuriate as pump spell along with Monstrous Rage. Dreadhorde Arcanist is kind of the odd one in the deck. You usually don't see this card in the deck that often, but lets you kind of rebuy some of your stuff. Plays nicely with Claim Fame, where you can return creatures and give it haste that turn. Your sideboard, you have Urbrass Forge for the grindier matchups, Thoughtseize for hand hate, Rending Volley, blue and white stuff, Reckless Rage for the creature mirrors, along with Fatal Push, and then Duress for some hand hate. Gruul Aggro, so 67%. So this is the Innkeeper's Talent version. So again, your mouse package, you have Paw Patch Recruit. I would probably just cut this to 2 and play 4 Manifold Mice. Screaming Nemesis, just an aggressively slanted deck. Soulscar Mage in this particular version plays well with Reckless Rage. It leaves the minus counters even on bigger stuff. But just very linear, very aggressive. You have the consistent Valiant to get you card advantage between these two, and it really scales you up in terms of building a big creature. The Paw Patch is really good into Rakdos, since a lot of targeted removal will allow you to kind of redistribute counters amongst your stuff. Sideboard, pick your poison, artifact, enchantment, and flyers. Red Cat Melee for the red mirrors, torch, cheap removal. Paw Patch Recruit, enchantment, or flyers, kind of complementing your pick your poisons. Pyroclasms for the low to the ground mirrors, you can kind of scale up. Scorching Shot is cheap removal. Forge and Hazard very strong against like Rakdos, potentially even Azorius Control if they're on authority or not. From one Gruul deck to another, so some overlap, but plays a little different, 65%. So this deck here is using Bushwacker. So this has Surge. If it's the second card you cast for the turn, you can cast it for 2 mana, and all your creatures get haste and +1. So what you're doing is you're plotting stuff like Aloe Alchemist or Cunning Coyote, and then the next turn you can cast them for 0 mana. The Aloe Alchemist gives immediate value in terms of when you plot it to give a creature +3/2 and trample. Burning Tree also plays nicely. You could do like Burning Tree, Coyote the same turn and give the Burning Tree haste. Heartfire Heroes in here, some cheap burn, rages, and then Atarka's Command overruns your team in terms of just giving it a boost of power, and then can be a lightning bolt to your opponent's face. Sideboard, another Nemesis for the red mirrors. Mage Bane is strong against like Phoenix, Lotus, anything playing a lot of spells. Destructive Revelry, Artifact Enchantment Hate. Shaper's Sanctuary against a lot of targeted removal like Rakdos, you can draw cards. Volley against blue and white decks, Red Cap Melee versus red decks, Grafdigger's Cage in case anything is trying to cheat things into play from graveyard or library, and then Claim can be used in the like kind of low to the ground creature mirrors, just steal like their blocker, smash in unexpected damage. Azorius Control, so the big bad control deck. So looking at kind of the sweeper package, going with Lockdown, 2 Verdicts, 1 Sunfall, 1 Farewell. So curving the removal a little bit cheaper that allow you to interact with these red decks and more aggressive decks more efficiently. March is a flexible removal option. You have a bunch of cheap kind of counters, change the equation, scales well against mono green, red decks, against some of the Rakdos stuff, veto, no more lies. So a bunch of kind of cheap interaction effects. You have Narset in here as a 1-of. Teferi draws you some cards, Wandering Emperor, and a 1-of Shark Typhoon. You also have Castle Ardenvale, Hall of the Storm Giant, Restless Anchorage, and Fountain Port as utility lines. Sideboard is a lot of 1-ofs. Hullbreaker Horror for the control mirrors, same with Shark Typhoon. You have Farewell as a catch-all removal option, good against things like Sacrifice. If you run into any like Zur Overlord style decks, anything committing various types of permanents. Dream Trawler is good against the aggressive decks, just kind of stabilize and gain you a bunch of life. Summary Dismissal can be reasonable against like Phoenix, anything putting a lot of things on the stack. Narset, good against Phoenix, kind of the mid-range decks. Think against like Unholy Annex, they can't draw the cards. Dispute, cheap counters. Knockout Blow, very good against the red decks. Ashiok's good against Phoenix, anything tutoring through your library. Test could be good in the mirrors, but also good against something like Creativity, where you take their key card. Revelry for the aggressive decks. Veto against kind of the control mirrors. Smite versus the aggressive decks. And Change versus the aggressive decks. We then have Izzet Control or Izzet Gearhulk. So this deck here is looking to play Indomitable Creativity to always hit the Torrential Gearhulk. So you're able to make cheap artifacts with things like discarding Magma Opus to the discard ability. You create a treasure token. You have things like unauthorized exits that can help you surveil and set up your drops. Stern Lesson makes a treasure token. You have Fable that makes tokens. You have Confounding Riddle that can help set up your draws. But basically, the key hits are Magma Opus or hitting Sublime Epiphany and then copying Torrential Gearhulk, kind of winning that way there. You could like opponent's upkeep, flashing Gearhulk potentially. Just so this one has more of a fair plan compared to like the Cheeto to Traxa or Valgaboth version, because you can actually pretty easily cast Gearhulk. So think of it as Izzet Control that has kind of a pseudo tutorable combo. Fountain Port also helps you make tokens that can be used for the creativity. Blue and white decks, Aether Gust for red-green decks, change the equation, cheap aggressive stuff. Narset's Reversal gets around things like Veto, cheap counters, Thought Erasure, Thought Seize, Negate, cheap counter, Anger for sweepers, Dispute in here as a cheap counter, Narset for like Phoenix, decks looking to draw a lot, Shark Typhoon and Hullbreaker Horror in the control mirrors when you're not going to be tapping out for creativity, lets you play more at flash speed. Dimir Ninjas 60%, so we got some Kaidos in here, and you're kind of playing the ninjutsu shell, so flashing things in, cheap effects, Spyglass Siren, Mockingbird can copy your creatures, Fairy Miscreant can draw you cards, Mockingbird Miscreant's kind of cool combo, and then you want to ninja out stuff like Moon Circuit Hacker, that lets you draw cards. The Thousand-Faced Ninja can make copies of stuff. So if you're making copies of Fairy Miscreant, can draw you more cards. Curiosity refills your hand with all these cheap evasive creatures. And then you can cheat into play Kaido. That lets you draw some cards that way there. And then just cheap disruption. Spell Pierces, Thought Seizes, Fatal Pushes, go for the throats. Cheap removal and cut down. Graveyard Hate and Ghost Vacuum. Spell Pierces, cheap disruption. Anoint, catch-all. Removal for some of the smaller stuff, good against Heartfire Hero, stuff like that. Disdainful Stroke for bigger mana decks. Ducat the G Silencer can be used as a removal option. Fighting Palm Ninja attacks the hand. Extinction Event's very good against like Mono Green or some of the bigger decks. I don't like playing 2 of Leyline. To me, it's either you play a 4 of or play something like Ghost Vacuum. Just something 2 of, you're just not consistently going to hit it. And in this deck, you can't. Like, it doesn't retroactively get you value. I'm just not a big fan of Leyline. personally. Shieldred for the grindier mid-range matchups. And then lastly, a deck that's been picking up is the blue-black Bounce decks. So this one's 30 and 10 by Dark Vulpine. It's a mythic, but give you a general idea. You're using This Town Ain't Big Enough Storm Chaser's talent package with like Hopeless Nightmare, Grim Bauble. You're complementing it with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, Fear of Isolation, just a bunch of cheap removal bounce effects. Omen of the Sea draws you cards. Meathook Massacre, it's a sweeper that you can pick up and then reuse over and over again. You have the Narset Gyre Reach Sanitarium lock on your opponent. An Overlord of the Flood Pits draws you discards. And then you have both mainboard Yorion and then sideboard, or like companion Yorion for value. Go for the throat, cheap removal, negates as cheap counters, graveyard hate, cheap counters for the mirrors, extinction events, very strong. Paradoxical Outcome's a pretty sweet one. Like end step, draw, bounce all your stuff in like the really grindy matchups, and then draw a bunch of cards and then recast them all, and then a Shieldred for the grindier. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you think of the format, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.